Welcome back to Making the Case. I'm Laverne McGee in for Yodit. Time now for our weekly series covering cases of those living on death row. Orlando native Ron Wright never thought he would ever end up facing a life sentence. A 22-year decorated combat veteran who fought in both Iraq wars, who at the time of his arrest was a deputy with the Orange County Sheriff's Department. In 2013, he was accused of killing a woman and her young son. The evidence against him was purely circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses, fingerprints, or DNA linking him to the crime. But despite that, a jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death. He spent 3 years on death row before the Florida Supreme Court tossed his conviction. Well, now he is fighting to help others. Ron Wright is here with us now. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your story. It's absolutely remarkable. Ron, before your arrest, you were a deputy sheriff. It was your job to make sure the law was being upheld and put the bad guys away. You must have been in such shock when you found out that you were the prime suspect in a murder case.
Well, it was more than just shock. It was kind of like a gut punch right there in the bottom of your gut that you just never saw coming. And I wasn't actually a deputy sheriff at the time that happened. I had been a deputy sheriff in the past and a police officer with another local municipality there in Central Florida. At the time, I was actually serving on active duty orders at MacDill Air Force Base.
Well, thank you for serving our country on top of everything that you've endured. Being repaid like that certainly is unbelievable. Now, during the trial, could you even imagine that the jury would find you guilty of murder, let alone being sentenced to death? Because like we said, the state had zero evidence to support their case.
Well, that was probably the most tricky and difficult thing about it. One thing I always like to share with people is in that courtroom, the courthouse itself is attached to the county jail there, so you don't get on a transport bus and get driven to the jail. You're walked back and forth to the jail and the back of the courtrooms over there. And several days, I had so many of those deputies walking me back to the detention center telling me, things are looking good for you. I haven't heard anybody say anything that makes it seem like you even knew about this, much less committed the crime.
Really? So you were feeling confident at that point that you would be set free?
Well, confident in one way and nervously angry in another, because part of the prosecution strategy wasn't to present evidence of guilt. It was more or less to assassinate my character and insult my integrity.
Why do you think they would try to do that?
Well, typically, if there's no evidence that can prove you guilty, then how else do you get a jury to convict you unless you find a way to make them think you're this low down, no good, lying, cheating, dirty, type of guy that they would come to hate and want to hold accountable for something. And the truth about the matter, as far as whether he's guilty or innocent, is irrelevant. They dislike you enough that they're going to say guilty because they want to hold you accountable for what you're charged with.
But you fought in two different wars. I mean, I don't know how they could assassinate your character. Certainly you have, quite a lot behind you. We know that war is hard, but obviously so is being confined to a windowless cell for 23 hours a day, knowing you're condemned to die. I'm wondering, did your time as an airman help prepare you for what life on death row was like?
To an extent, but I'll tell you something, when you're sitting in that courtroom listening to the way the prosecutors tend to want to lay out their case, the truth, your past, all the good you've done, what a great person you are, what kind of man you are, father you are, or soldier you were, or what, tragedies you've dealt with, or risk you've taken, none of that matters. It's all irrelevant. I mean, even the truth of whether or not you're guilty or innocent is irrelevant. It's simply them, as one person told me one day, it's their story and they get to tell it the way they want to.
That's pretty scary. So you're basically saying systemic racism.
Well, I can't really say that racism played a role in it, although I don't doubt it as far as the prosecutors are concerned. But one thing I do know is what a lot of people don't understand when it comes to how these cases are made. People make these decisions. It's like they present something they call evidence. Well, what determines that to be evidence? It's the decision of the person who decided this is evidence. Just like when they decide who a suspect is or who they want to prosecute, it's a decision made by the prosecution team who they choose to prosecute. And that's regardless of whether there are other viable and credible suspects. In my case, they didn't even bother to investigate.
Unbelievable. And on top of that, while on death row, you say that you discovered that many of your fellow inmates also faced similar circumstances. I know you still consider many of them to be friends. Would you mind sharing with us some of their stories?
Well, one of the craziest things I learned while I was on death row was, the mentality of the way a lot of these guys know. I'm not going to sit here and claim they're all innocent and they should be exonerated, but it's the way they think and the way, they explain things and talk about things. And one of the things that hurts me so much is how they have such a lack of understanding of what's really going on and how things play out in our legal and justice system. And whether or not they get the help or the explanation to help them understand what they're sitting in the middle of seems to be not happening very much, in my opinion. I'm lucky that I had the background as a law enforcement officer and good attorneys that helped me, understand things that I didn't know. But so many of these guys coming off the streets, they just have no idea what awaits them on the road ahead.
Yeah, that's a scary thing. I mean, you said you didn't think it was race, maybe in your case, but what would the motive be to take an innocent man and try to, discredit him?
A conviction. They're there to win. That's all it's about. They want to win the case. As cops, as law enforcement officers, we want to close a case with an arrest. Prosecutors, they want to close a case with a conviction.
Wow, when you put it that way, that makes sense. Now, you have said you believe, many people believed you were innocent, and there were many in there like yourself who were innocent. With that in mind, what was it like leaving them behind? How hard was that for you, knowing that you were innocent and some of them were innocent, but you had to leave them behind and walk away?
Well, in situations like that, what you're really more concerned about is this thing you wake up with every day, wondering, when is that day going to come? Will I get exonerated? Will somebody see through all the smoke and mirrors and realize the truth or not? You're not really thinking too much about the other guys' cases because, one, you're not involved in them. You don't know the whole story, just like so many members of juries don't. And while you hope and pray for the best for them, all you can do is gain your freedom so you can do more and better to help them from the outside than by sitting in a cell next to them on the inside.
And it's amazing. I know that you are trying to help some of them. Now, in 2017, you were finally cleared of all charges. That must have been amazing. What led to your exoneration?
I read the Supreme Court's opinion, and as you said earlier, this was a wholly circumstantial case. What that simply means is there is no evidence that says this guy committed a crime or was near it, had anything to do with it. What the prosecutor did was, it's what they call in law the impermissible stacking of inferences. They basically tell the jury, if you believe this thing and then you believe that thing and then you can believe this thing and then you put them all together, you arrive at that conclusion of guilt. Well, that is illegal and not permitted in law. And not only that, it's basically like saying, if you believe he lied, then you should believe he cheated. And if you believe he lied and cheated, then you got to believe he stole. And it doesn't have to be true at all. That's basically what led to the conviction for me. And I'll tell you
So what
something
does it say
else.
about our
In one of the
justice
pretrial,
system? Go
well,
ahead.
what it says is that prosecutors get to walk into a courtroom without any facts, without any truth, and practically present to a jury what's known as a theory or a hypothesis. And in their theory, they're going to bring everything they can to bring reality to that theory and make it seem all true to a jury, yet all the while knowing it's not true. Two things members of a jury will never know. They will never know that these prosecutors telling them this story is not telling them the truth. The second thing they'll never know is these prosecutors may not even know what the actual truth really is, because in their theory, It's like watching a TV show. Here's what we want you to see, what we want you to believe, what we want you to be entertained by, and what we want you to feel is realistically happening. Don't think about the camera tricks, the theatrics, and all the pyrotechnics. They want you to believe this is really happening so that you're truly entertained by it.
Are you angry at all? They destroyed your reputation. You spent years, you lost years of your life. Are you still angry about this?
What I'm really angry about is the fact that when these mistakes and errors are made, and it's not a mistake, by the way, because they go into this courtroom with the intent of laying out a story the way they do. What angers me is they will not admit that they were wrong, and I don't want an apology for them. I simply want them to admit, hey, we got it wrong and we shouldn't have done that. The same way they put a defendant on trial and they want to see remorse in them or want them to give a confession and be sorry and remorseful for it. But far too often, prosecutors will stand by their story as if it is the God's honest truth written in stone and from the gospel. And it's like they are willing to stand behind their lie when they know full well that's not true.
Ron, your story is incredible. Once again, thank you for your service to this country. It's awful what happened to you, but so thankful that you have been able to get out and clear your name and move forward. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your story.